Hello and welcome. This is called Train Wrecks for Jesus, but as you're going to find out very soon, we have another name for it too. My name is Maggy Whitehouse. I'm an ordained independent minister.
And my name is Mark Townsend, and I was a Church of England vicar, and now I'm an independent, I don't know what, but something.
Well, the purpose of this discussion today is to find out who the heck we are. Because we're both unusual ordained priests who actually, in a way, have walked away from the system and are trying to find a place in the world which is relevant for the 21st century with mysticism and magic and joy. Would you agree?
I would totally agree. And interestingly, I think we both like to use the term hedge priest, don't we?
Very much so.
Which is, of course, a kind of edgy sort of title for someone who sits between boundaries, between borders, and therefore totally on the edge, and hopefully able to have a foot in both worlds.
If only two worlds, maybe more worlds than two.
Yeah.
It was a derogatory phrase, I gather, back in the day, because it sort of meant somebody who didn't have an established church. And of course, neither you nor I have an established church. I still have a bishop hanging on by his fingertips.
Yeah, I think it was a medieval term for a vagabond priest who was sort of out there living in the hedgerows and without a benefice. But like all pejoratives, I think we're trying to reclaim, or like some pejoratives, we're trying to reclaim it and give it a different spin, because I think it's a fabulous place to be. Outside, I mean, it's where Jesus was, isn't it? And Francis and all of the good guys. You know?
Absolutely, and we're not holding ourselves up to be like Jesus and Francis and all the good
guys.
Francis,
no.
But we're trying to follow in those footsteps. The simple life, the life that preserves and loves the planet, and in a way, we're trying to live in liminal space, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly.
So, how did you get to be a vicar, and how did it turn out to be not quite right for you?
It's a bloody long story.
Hurrah!
And it probably relates to the whole notion of being a fuck up for Jesus.
Yes. Now, look, we call this train wrecks for Jesus, but to be perfectly honest, we'd rather call it fuck ups for Jesus. So on the recording, that's what we're going to call it.
Yeah, that just slipped out there. That's like a Boris mode. It just popped out. Yeah, so I was always a bit of a mess. I kind of got into religion through being pretty down on myself, and I came into it through a very powerful Pentecostal sort of God loves you sort of mode, which was great for me as someone who felt down on himself. But very quickly, the God loves you turns out with a catch, and he loves you, but he kind of had to kill his son to show that to you, and that sort of thing. And those sort of questions ended up with me being squeezed out of that tradition just because of my own questioning head. I ended up a Church of England vicar, and I loved it actually, and I still love the Church of England. But I was also going through a horrible time at home. I had a pretty unpleasant divorce that I was going through. I made a major balls up. I kind of talked to the wrong person and found a bit of comfort in a place that I shouldn't. And I ended up confessing all of this to my bishop a few years later. And the long and the short of that was he told me to have 3 years off or resign for 3 years, whichever way you want to put it. At the end of those 3 years, I discovered that I'm actually better off on the outside. And so when I got my license back, I decided to very politely send it back because I prefer to be a hedge priest. I don't totally, that's not totally true. I love the Church of England with an absolute passion, but I think I can be a better friend to it on the outside, and I can certainly be a better priest on the outside. As you all know, Maggie, we get the privilege of meeting and mingling with and serving and sort of blessing the sort of situations, I suppose, and people that maybe the church doesn't reach or isn't able to, you know. So I've done so many amazing, and that's not me doing amazing things, but amazing in the sense of the amazing people that I've been able to be brought into their lives to name their children or bless their children or marry them or do funerals. that I never would have had the opportunity to meet, I don't think, as a regular Church of England vicar. Yeah, so, and I think the other thing about us, Maggie, we're not trying to say this is the way to be. It's the way to be for some people who perhaps don't work within institutions, because there's definitely a place for the big institutions. I'm not in any way saying that they that they're not valid or anything like that. But yeah, so that's a bit about me.
Yeah, edge priest or hedge priest, that fits very, very well. That makes sense. And what you were saying about the fundamentalist aspect, both of us are huge fans, and I would venture to say friends of Father Richard Rohr from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he's written books about this. The first half of life, if you don't have a strong container to build the foundation or your ego, then you're really going to need something like a fundamentalist church to give you the boundaries that you need to help you feel safe. But the idea is to grow out of it. So it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, as though you really needed that phase to understand you were loved, and then you could stand on it and go, well, yes, and I don't think this is entirely appropriate.
Yeah. And the other thing I think that I've discovered through just reading, reflecting, screwing up, falling down, being picked back up, and then looking back over it, is that we often create our own future by our, and I know you very much believe this, Maggie, but we almost, I'm not necessarily talking in a karmic way now, but we literally create the world that we almost need. And so when I think back to that time where I went to my bishop, I was about to go to another post. It was about 2 or 3 years since the major balls up. And that was all sort of dealt with and over. But I still knew that I needed to face him and be totally honest with him and say, look, this is me. This is the mistake I've made. You can sort of have me with these flaws, or you can tell me to go. But whatever, I need to make my confession to my Father in God, sort of thing. And I was talking to Philip Carr-Gomm years later, who's was the chief of the Order of Bards, Ovicts and Druids, and he said to me, "There's an amazing, almost medical scenario that, well, it isn't really medical, but when a woman is about to give birth, he said he's been led to believe that there's the little embryo is kind of is cocooned and comforted for 9 months, but then something happens. Something is sort of secreted that makes it an inhospitable environment, and so it has to leave the womb in order to experience the next stage of life. So almost what was comforting and nourishing and a beautiful warm place of safety becomes toxic. And that's a crazy but wonderful analogy for what sometimes we do to ourselves. We do things maybe half consciously that creates the present situation, or makes the present situation impossible to stay within, so we have no option but to move on. And it just helped me to make sense of what was going on, and I certainly now look back and I don't think of that as a major mistake. I do in a sense, but I see it as a necessary part of my journey.
Yeah, well,
so I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. The idea of starting to talk together like this is that we would love to do work around being fuck-ups for Jesus, because I'm a total fuck-up for Jesus. I will put my hand on my heart, and my story is even longer than yours. When I started my fuck-ups for Jesus, I was an armchair Christian, which meant I sort of showed up at Christmas and Easter. I did sometimes think about the religious life because I was a journalist, and I did an interview with the Poor Clares at Baddesley Clinton for the radio station I worked for, and it was just magical talking to these sisters, only through the grill because they were enclosed, and there was just this peace and depth. And there was a moment when I thought, well, maybe I could, but then of course in those days, because I'm older than you couldn't be a vicar if you were a woman, so the door was very firmly shut. But there was always just something that was looking, and I had to work out whether that was just pure codependency, actually, the need to get strokes for helping other people, or whether it was real. And the wake-up call for me, the the toxic fluid in the uterus, if you like, was I got married to an atheist when I was 32. My first marriage, I never even lived with anybody. I'd had a really avoiding commitment kind of life, which wasn't going to be very good for a potential vicar, come to think of it. And anyway, I met this guy in China when I was filming a documentary back in my media days. Fell in love, got married, and a year later he was dead. And
Right.
the hospital chaplain at his deathbed did the usual, what religion are you, my dear, and what religion is your husband? And I said, oh, he's an atheist. And he went, oh, well, I'm afraid if he doesn't believe in our Lord Jesus Christ, he can't go to heaven. Sorry, and walked away. Now, I'm fine. He was an angel. Yeah. Absolutely an angel, because he swiped the rug out from under my feet at a time when I had no defences. So I couldn't cover over that. I couldn't pretend it didn't happen. It was so big. And Henry died 2 days later. And back in those days, this is 30 more years ago, you could only have a religious or a humanist service. There weren't the celebrants like there are today. And I couldn't bear a humanist one, and I couldn't justify it to the families. So basically, I walked up the aisle behind my young husband's coffin, hearing him damned to hell with I am the resurrection and the life. And everything in me was going, no! So I really threw everything out of the window. I couldn't get rid of God. You and I have talked about this before, though. I could get rid of Jesus very quickly because of all the rubbish around that, and we'll be talking about that in some depth, I'm sure. But God just would not go.
Yeah.
There had to be something. I had to believe in something bigger than me. And I dived into the New Age and became a Reiki healer and a National Federation of the Spiritual Healers healer. And I did courses on alternative medicine, and I taught courses on alternative medicine, and I ran a holistic magazine. But I realised one day that metaphysically, in the corner, metaphorically actually, there was a beautiful pink silk throw with tea lights and crystals, and underneath it was this suppurating rage against Christianity. And I had to dig that out and clean it up. So that's basically what my life's been all about, I think.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, very, very similar. I mean, in different ways. I think that's why we kind of click and spark off each other. But and there are, I think since we toyed with this idea a few weeks ago, I've been thinking about the different fuck ups there are in the church's history, and it's
where do you start?
Exactly. And even in the Bible, I mean, look at Peter and look at the disciples in Mark's gospel, where they all bugger off, and that's how the original Mark's gospel finishes. There's no, the bit that we kind of know is the ending of it is apparently added later. So it's a story that ends in a complete mess. And look at the cross itself. I mean, to the world's eyes, it is a complete catastrophe with no good news. And yet, so it's all these wonderful images of being fucked up that actually are in themselves gospel.
Fucked up and fucked over. Oh, there are going to be so many complaints, and I'm having so much fun. This is so many years of going, Perkin Elmer, you are feckin' kidding me, right? Because you can't swear. Yes, it started with a mess. And the whole thing about the crucifixion is a mess, yes, and people have to work out how to justify why this good man gets strung up on a cross. And in the end, we get what I would call the first colossal fuck up of the Christian church, which is St. Augustine and original sin.
Yeah.
Because Jesus would never have heard of it.
No.
Jewish people don't even know about original sin. They know that we had what's termed the fall because we disobeyed. But if you look at that story as a mystic, the levels in that about learning about cause and effect and how you have to break things to learn about things, they're extraordinary. But then St. Augustine comes along and says, well, maybe it's because God had to send somebody really good to punish to make us feel better about things. And it was just a theory, Mark. It's not a dogma. It still isn't a dogma. And of course, the blame game picked it up and ran with it, loved it.
Yeah. And that's, of course, or a version of that sort of, when I talked about being caught by the Pentecostal tradition, for a young, fucked up guy, that was the message that got me, because it spoke to my, and this is what's so kind of, in a way, sinister, in a way, about some kinds of religion. The idea that I, it kind of brought into my own guilt and shame. Even before I'd made really that many mistakes, but you just felt pretty shitty and shameful about being me. But and there's this big picture of this God who still looks at us with kind of rage in his eyes, and then this picture of Jesus stepping in and taking that for you for a kind of pretty screwed up young guy. It was a strangely powerful. And it was what converted me.
Yeah,
but it wasn't. But it's not the gospel.
It's one of those yes and situations, isn't it? It's exactly what you needed then as a foundation to grow up through.
Yeah.
But I think if you stay in that, you stay in what I call kindergarten religion, and you get so binary, as in that's right, this is wrong. You go to hell, you go to heaven, and it becomes all about. I can't remember if it was you who invented this phrase, or Richard, or who, but it's it's all about who's invited to the party, as opposed to, it's a party, let's have fun.
Yeah.
You can't come to the party, you're wrong.
I was listening to, have you heard of the Celtic teacher, John Philip Newell?
I've heard of, yes.
Yeah, I was listening to an audio book of his on the road today, and he was talking about original sin, and he said what it left the Christian tradition with, particularly in the West, of course, is this feeling that what is the deepest in you is opposed to God, and how awful to walk around thinking that the deepest part of us is opposed to God. Surely the beauty of the original Eden story is that they're blessed by God, they're good. I can't quote it now. I'm not a Pentecostal anymore. But he looked back and said, "This is good." It's a complete reversal of and his John Philip Newell's beautiful idea of Jesus, the incarnation, is simply to be a reminder, to remind us that what we are essentially what he is. And how arrogant that sounds, but at our deepest, we are what Christ is at his deepest, and how mind blowing.
We've
I remember
all found moments of kindness. I was just going to say, we've all found unexpected moments of kindness from strangers, and that's the true humanity. That's the humanity without the ego. When the chips are down and there are just two people, and one needs the other to save their life, the other will save their life.
Yeah.
Except in exceptional circumstances. But I interrupted you. Do go on.
No, I can't remember what I was going to say.
Oh,
that's
fair
probably
enough.
Good. I do that all the time. My head is too full. I'm knackered.
Somebody's going to be writing a list down here, the words they use: knackered, buggered up. Right, I'd like to ask you about your pagan leadings, because, as you know, I've been spending the last 2 years with a wonderful woman, Susie Crockford, doing a podcast, which is unhappily on hold, but no, it will work out to be something better for Susie and for me, and that's okay. One has sorrow, because I think it's gone, but one picks it up and moves on. But one of the things I was always mentioning to her was the fact that there are vicars who work also as pagans, who work with the land, and you were very drawn to Druidry, weren't you?
I was, and the thing is that since it's probably 20 years since I sort of first dabbled and then got very involved in Druidry and other forms of paganism, but over that time there have been more and more Church of England vicars and others who are, to the point where a little photograph came up on my Facebook wall the other day of about 10 years ago, when we had a gathering of Christians and pagans together in, I think it was the Amadown Centre in Somerset. And in about maybe 50, 60 people, excuse that, 2 or 3 days, I think, if I remember. And they had three leaders of three different Druid orders, all called Philip, interestingly, and lots of clergy, Anglican clergy mainly, and so it's quite exciting that, you know, over the last decade or so, it's become, I don't know whether it's more acceptable or whether just people have got braver to be Christian clergy in establishment churches and you know, embracing the nature-based traditions. I guess they have to be pretty careful how they express it in public. I mean, the book that when you talked about me going full blown or going into the Druidry stuff, I of course in 2007 I left the Church of England, so I was very free to express myself however I wanted, and I did. And I went perhaps I got so, a little bit like what you said earlier on, where you can't get rid of the idea of God or the divine, but Christianity itself was something that was kind of, you know, angry with. I guess in the first few years I was still so angry with Christianity, but still so passionate about the divine, that I almost felt that I was becoming a pagan Druid. There are lots of Christian Druids, and of course the revival Druidry began within a Christian culture or tradition, but most modern day Druids would say they're pagans. And I got very turned on, and I love the ritual to this day. I love the ritual. I love the fact that they celebrate. They have a nice steathbod every time they have a ritual. So there's always an offering of the arts. There's always a lot of fun, passionate rituals that really mean something. There's no kind of little splashing of tiny dabs of water on babies' heads. It's like drenched in, you know, it's really
throw them in the river. If the river doesn't eat them, they're all right.
If you're going to use, Richard Raw taught me this as well when I went on a vision quest with him in New Mexico. If you're going to use ritual, you know, use it properly, use it with its full vivid power and potential. You know, use the fire to jump through, and, you know, the ashes, and you know, so I was very turned on by paganism, and some of my dearest friends and the people I trust most on earth are pagan people. And it sounds like there's going to be a but, and the but is, and it's not in any way turning my back, because the pagan people that I know have always thought of me as a priest. They're the ones who called me hedge priest. They've always thought of me as a Christian priest who's also part of them. It was me who perhaps took that a bit further and felt I'm becoming fully pagan. But I can't, because I still love that bloody man called Jesus. You know.
I'm in love with him again too. It's shocking. We ought to fight for him. No. Well, you actually wrote a book, didn't you, called Jesus Through Pagan Eyes?
Yeah.
How did that come about, and what's in it?
Well, actually, a Facebook friend of mine who's also the acquisitions editor for Llewellyn, she'd been looking at a few of my bits on Facebook and saw that I'd written some other things. And I guess from that knew a bit of my history. I think I'd written one called Diary of a Heretic at that point, which is the subtitles of The Pagan Adventures of a Christian Priest. So she said, do I want to present an idea to Llewellyn? And I thought, wow, what a gift. Mm-hmm. And I'd always wanted to explore this idea of, can a pagan still have a relationship with Jesus, with not being a Christian pagan, but a full-blown pagan, because of course they have relationships with all sorts of gods and goddesses all over the world. So I thought, could that be possible? Because I didn't know many pagans who, there always seemed to be, you know, even though there's Kabbalah and other Jewish things and Judeo-Christian and angels, that there's a difficulty when it comes to actual, you know, Christianity and paganism. Yeah. So, and I thought, because I also was trying to work out, could I, as someone who's becoming very pagan, also hold on to Jesus as a friend? So I thought I'd explore the idea of Jesus through pagan eyes. And in a way, and I got to interview some amazing, leading figures in world paganism, and some of them wrote fabulous stories to put in my book, essays. But for the first part of the book, it was really me trying to hammer out this, or look at this question: can I still have a friend in Jesus and be a pagan? And I discovered by the end that I could. But I kind of ended up splitting up Jesus into three characters. And I know this is nonsense to some people. To people who follow the historical Jesus debate, it's well known, or it's a common practice to separate Jesus of history from the Christ of faith. But those of us who've come across Matthew Fox and Richard Rohr and others will also hear about the cosmic Christ. So I think there are three Jesus / Christ characters. There's the historical Jesus, which we see glimmers of in the earliest Gospels. There's the cosmic Christ, which is probably that universal force that knocked Saul over to become Paul and met on the road to Damascus. That wasn't the physical Jesus. That was a spiritual thing. And of course, if you listen to Matthew Fox and Rohr, the cosmic Christ is the sort of divine creative energy in all things, the divine part of matter. So, and then the third Jesus, or the middle one, is really the church's, the Orthodox Jesus, the church's Christ, which I'm still struggling with now, but it's the kind of Jesus of John's Gospel who says things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life, which I don't for 1 minute believe was a literal. I don't believe Jesus said those things, but I do believe that the church in later reflection heard those things through that cosmic Christ, but applied it to the Jesus Christ of history. So you've got this kind of half literal, historical, half metaphorical, symbolic, sandwiched together in a person, which is perfectly okay to do unless you totally literalize it. And that's what I think Christians do, and what pagans have a problem with. Pagans can cope with the cosmic Christ and the historical Jesus, but they find it very difficult when a so-called historical Jesus Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, the rest of you go in hell, which is how they hear it. So that's where I was with that. And so it turned out to be something that I've been rereading a lot lately to see, have I changed in my views at all. I've certainly become more Christocentric lately, and that's not in an exclusive way at all, far from it, but I'm just seeing this Christ light everywhere, which is fantastic for me, because I had almost thrown the baby out with the bathwater.
Yes, I really relate to that. These last 2 years talking with Susie and having to explain what I believe, and we came up with this phrase, which was, how do I know what I think until I hear what I say? Because quite often you say something which you've been taught or you may have thought, but as it falls out of your mouth you go, what? Actually, I really don't know about that. And Richard Rohr sums it up beautifully for me when he says, Christ is not Jesus' surname.
Yeah.
And I'm reading Cynthia Bourgeois at the moment. I studied with her and Richard in Albuquerque. Sorry, name dropping here, but her book, The Law of Three. I'm going through it again a few years on, and I'm literally reading one page 6 times to try and take in this idea of the triunian aspect, or Trinity as we call it. And you've actually just explained to me how I would explain Trinity, this idea of a cosmic relationship which included a historical person, but is much bigger than that historical person. And if you just land it in that historical person, you make it totally binary, as in you follow this guy, you worship this guy, or you're out. No, in the beginning was the blueprint. In the beginning was the Word. That's the cosmic Christ. It's the whole of creation. And the Bible, the creation is the first Bible. And the Elohim comes in. It's a feminine noun with a masculine plural ending. Comes in and creates the universe. And then humanity turns up. And then we have Yahweh Elohim. So Yahweh only turns up with humanity. And yet all the emphasis you find in the Bible is on the Yahweh God, the God of humanity. But we have to include the Elohim in there, because if we've got those two together, we have the possible birth of a third, which, as you say, is this cosmic Christ. So I'll ramble on about this for hours, and this is why I'm wanting to talk to you again.
It's great stuff.
But it also does make us heretics, which is the original word of heretic means strong thinker or original thinker, and I kind of like that.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to push the boundaries.
I was put on a heresy test once, and I say that.
Tell me. Oh, wow!
It's hilarious. in that 3-year period where I was not working as a Church of England vicar, but still ordained as a Church of England priest, and I pushed the boundaries in terms of the paganism, and also I'd done a lot of gay blessings for people, and all of these things were kind of turning heads because I don't know how it happened, but there are a few things. Oh, it might have been me actually. There was the Pope, the then Pope, wrote a letter about this. What was it? Climate change is not as dangerous for our planet as homosexuality, or something ridiculous like that. And I, for some reason, it came into our local paper, and I wrote a letter complaining about that. Or giving my point, and then it became a toing and froing of letters against mine. It was hilarious. It went on for about 9 weeks, and slowly my kind of pagan leanings came out as well. And then I had a summons to I ended up by writing to one of the, I think it was a Baptist minister or someone. He'd put something, and I said, I think if Jesus ever came back, he'd say, "Screw the church, I'm going up the pub for a pint." And they bloody published it. So I had a phone call from the bishop going to apologise to this person. So but then I also, it had become known that I was sort of exploring these pagan things. And so during that period where I was possibly going to get my license back, there was one more hurdle for me. And I was asked to go and sit down with a theologian who happened to be an evangelical theologian, very nice man, a college principal, or training course principal, and for him to test me on my orthodoxy, which was, I love things like that, because, back then as well, when there were a few more liberal bishops, I mean, all I had to do was sort of lean back and say, well, I'm far less of a heretic than, that Anglican bishop of whatever, because, well, I mean, back then they were far more liberal than me, in terms of, actual old-fashioned liberalism. But anyway, that's just a bit sort of facetious. I enjoyed the kind of being tested to see what then, and a lot of that cosmic Christ stuff came out, and it was just, that's really what provoked me to write the book Diary of a Heretic, actually, because I felt like I was on a heresy trial, and it wasn't. I mean, it was just a bit, for me, it was quite an enjoyable experience. And as I say, the guy talking to me was lovely, but it was being tested along the orthodox lines and just seeing how far outside of that I was. I suppose, if I'm absolutely honest, I was quite unorthodox, but in the Church of England, you can afford to be, because it's always been a church that, you've got non-realists on the one side who basically don't believe in a God, an actual God. And then on the other hand, you've got, Anglo-Catholics who make the Pope look like a Protestant. you got evangelicals who, kind of pray before they have a dental appointment. It's a broad church, and that's what I loved about the Church of England. It was there for everybody, and it was something that you could almost kind of sail with and move in and out of faith because the community is holding the faith for you. That's to me the beauty of Anglicanism. It's scripture, tradition, and reason. There's no one authority. It's and so people move. And I'm a bit of a piss taker, but that's just me. I'm a piss taker of myself. That's hence this book that we're talking about, because the prime, I guess, 2 fuck-ups in it is going to be me and you.
God, yes.
We're going to be letting it all out.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is a sort of tryout, because Mark and I intend to write a book called Fuck Ups for Jesus, or working title Train Wrecks for Jesus, just so we can get a publisher for it and not get on too many heresy trials before we start. One of the things I love about Richard Rohr is he says he prays every day for a humiliation to make sure he doesn't get too arrogant. Well, I've never had to pray for one yet.
No, not me. No.
But my story to ordination is completely wonky, and just made quite sure I was knocked off my feet all the time, to make quite sure I wasn't going to get stuck into the, ooh, look at me, I'm a vicar now. I wanted to first train with Unity Church in the USA because they were incredibly helpful to me during one of my major fuck-ups in life when I emigrated with my now ex-husband, and it all went horribly wrong, lost absolutely everything. Became the first person in the world to bring a dog home from America to Europe to England via passports for pets, but nobody was interested, so didn't even get the kudos for that, but still talking about it because I obviously want the strokes. But
Unity Church, sorry, is that part of another denomination?
No, it actually is its own denomination.
Oh,
started by Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. It's one of those affirmative prayer churches, and they are rather lovely. I still work on their prayer line on Thursday mornings for my sins, which literally it is for my sins. And anyway, they wouldn't have me because I wasn't a graduate. Back in those days. So, and the Church of England, I couldn't go to the Church of England because I was already too much of a heretic at that point. And eventually I started doing funerals because it's this old thing of, I want to try and make sure other people don't go through the crap that I went through with Henry's funeral. And I did a lot of funerals, and I still do them just as you do, to the exact level of faith of the family that's needed. Exactly what they need. It's their time. And I was doing the funeral of someone who was murdered in London. And my bishop, who is a former Catholic priest, who's now an independent, was at the funeral, and he phoned me up the following weekend and said, yes, well, there I was in the congregation, and God said to me, you need her and she needs you. How about it?
Wow.
And I was going, what? And bless him, he said, I tell you what, invite me up for the weekend. We had met a few times. We knew each other vaguely. Cook me a nice roast Sunday dinner. And if you don't want to do it by the end of the weekend, we'll say no more about it. And by the end of the weekend, I was entranced by this opportunity to put my head in the yoke that is light, to try this out, to see if I could be healed enough to do this, or what it would do for me. But the most amusing thing was, it was a full ordination. I did a form of seminary. I've learnt New Testament Greek. He still monitors me week by week.
Right.
I'm in deep shit probably once a month, and told so. Why are you doing this? That sounds like ego. What that is, that, the other. But the funniest thing about it was that I discovered 6 weeks after I was ordained that there was a Wikipedia page up, and Pope Benedict had said that any woman ordained within any branch of the Catholic Church and any bishop who ordained them were hereby excommunicated. Backdated and forward dated. So I found out via Wikipedia. I mean, you could have sent a text. You would think, wouldn't you? You'd think he'd send a text. By Wikipedia, that the second I was accepted into the Independent Catholic Church as a minister, I was also excommunicated. So how's that for a fuck up?
That's brilliant. Oh God. That's
literally,
hilarious.
Oh God, yeah.
Bless them.
Bless them. Anyway, we've been talking for a good 40 minutes, Mark, so shall we close it for the moment and say, if you have listened to this and if you enjoyed it, it would be lovely to let us know, because we'd like to do more, and we want to write this book, Fuck Ups for Jesus, about all the times that when you get it wrong, it actually leads to something miraculous.
Yeah, absolutely.
And both of us, I think, live lives that are miracles. Of course, we're messes and we get so much wrong, but if you're anything like me, you wake up and just go, thank you for another day to learn more.
Absolutely. And I think for all those fuck-ups out there who are responding or kind of feeling slightly warmed, be even more warmed, because, you have a spark of God within you, fuck up or not. And I think sometimes the falling enables us to get out of our heads a little bit more. Especially those of us like me who's always in my head, but those mistakes, those falling down and cracking open, help you see that inner gold, which is the God light. So it's a kind of, yeah.
An old friend of mine once said she thought childbirth was invented to bring women to their knees. Now, I don't know that that's true, but I think the fuck-ups are invented to bring us to our knees. And I don't mean on our knees as in, my God, I'm a fuck-up, but in our knees as in, I can't do this. I don't know where to go. I need help. Please help me.
Yeah.
And I've never had that help turned down.
So it's irreverent, but serious too.
Yes. An irreverent but serious discussion. And we'll talk again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maggie. Cheers.